Hi, I'm Ari, the Youth Coordinator of Coyote, Rhode Island, and welcome to the Good Neighbors.
Hi, I'm Bella Robinson. I'm the Executive Director of Coyote, Rhode Island, and the producer of the Good Neighbors TV show.
The Good Neighbors is the first show on sex worker rights, and though we start there, we do understand how those issues intersect with others, like climate change, the rights for trans and queer safety, and other social justice movements, both locally and nationally. And for those intersections, we don't really have names for us yet. So on this episode, we will talk about Coyote, Rhode Island, which is short for Call Off Your Old Tired Ethics. And we will invite other organizations and organizers to talk about their movements in future episodes and keep you updated on how you can get involved if you're watching this. So before we get into talking to Bella about the history of Coyote and their personal history with sex work, I would love for us to just define some words and phrases. Can we talk about the difference between sex work and sex trafficking?
Yes, that's a really
get conflated.
Yeah, that's a really good question because they often get conflated. So sex work is actually anyone that earns a living off of erotica labor. So you have illegal sex workers and legal sex workers. Illegal sex workers would be prostitution. Legal sex workers would be porn performers, cam performers, dominatrix, erotic dancers, and so forth. Sex trafficking is legally defined as the use of force, coercion, or fraud to entice someone into prostitution, or any time a minor is involved, even if that minor is under their own control.
Okay.
Some other things we should talk about is criminalization is obviously criminalizing an act or a product of something the government doesn't like.
Right.
And the difference between a felony and a misdemeanor. So a misdemeanor charge would be like your first DUI or shoplifting charge. You could get up to a year in jail and a fine. Usually you get probation. A felony, however, is much more serious. You're then a convicted felony. And you get up to 5 years in prison, even longer, minimum 5 years. So there's a big difference.
Yeah, good to know. Knowing that, could you go into your history on, how you got involved in Coyote?
Sure. So I've been in the sex industry on and off for about 35 years. And some of the time when I was younger and not making great decisions was not that empowering or great. I previously incarcerated, I've been to prison, but I've had a lot of good experiences in the sex industry too. So around 2008, I was in New Jersey, and I had a friend, we were in our mid-40s, and we had an escort ad on Craigslist. And on a Thursday afternoon at 2 o'clock in the rain, a New Jersey SWAT team kicked in our door with the Ram waving around guns, calling it a quality of life investigation. So it was really, really traumatic. And I was jailed for 90 days and ordered by the judge to pay a $3,720 fine. And when I told him I couldn't afford it, that I was a single mother and had lost my job and home during the housing crash, he did the math and said, you're going to pay $310 a month for 12 months or I'm going to issue a warrant for your arrest. So I was basically kind of trafficked by the criminal justice system in the state of New Jersey. When I got out of jail, a client told me that it was legal in Rhode Island, and I kind of really didn't believe him. And when I Googled it and found out it was true, I felt like, how did I not know this? And I packed up my house and I moved to Rhode Island. And I felt free for the first time in my life.
That's awesome. Can you explain why you felt more free in Rhode Island than in New Jersey or Florida?
Yes. Well, under decriminalization, it's a game changer because now I can tell on you. I don't have to, you can't threaten to go to the cops. I can't be evicted. So I had some rights. And one of the things I remember most, I moved up here right about the time the Craigslist killer had just killed the girl in Boston. And I thought, well, it's decriminalized, but there's a serial killer out there. Right. But he came to Rhode Island and robbed an escort, and she dialed 911 because she was decriminalized, which resulted in them catching him before he hurt anyone else. So anytime any population can't come forward and report being abused or harmed, it obviously creates, it actually fuels exploitation and violence.
Yeah, definitely, because you can't ask for help and you can't have friends come with you to try to provide that safety. Yep. Can you talk more about how Coyote started itself?
Sure. Well, our original founder of Coyote was Margot St. James in the mid-'70s. And Margot, they used to call it the Coyote, the Loose Women's Organization, and they had acronyms WHO, which stood for whores, housewives, and others meant lesbians. And Margot started conversations about women's work that were unpaid work, like raising children, house cleaning, all, taking care of your elderly parents, all the emotional and physical labor women had done for years and weren't given much credit for. A lot of the sex workers back then were, and still today, were poor single mothers. So some other things that Margot did is, keep in mind, around in the 70s in Rhode Island, prostitution was a felony. It's actually the only state that I think it was a felony. And the statute was written, if you had indiscriminate sex, you could be charged with prostitution.
So if you had sex with anyone.
Right, anyone besides your spouse.
Marriage, yeah.
Right. So Margot filed a constitutional challenge, a lawsuit against Providence Police. And her first claim was, one, the law's too overbroad. What does that even mean? Two, you're only arresting the women because 89% of the arrests were the women selling sex and not the men buying sex.
Right.
And three, what right did the state have to do in the sex lives of adults in private? So how it turned out is the legislatures ended up reducing prostitution from a felony to a misdemeanor. And they claimed they were getting so many calls and complaints about street prostitution, they need to work these cases through the court system quicker, which was easier to do if it was a misdemeanor and a lower crime.
Right.
So the case was dismissed, but the judge recognized that Coyote versus Roberts did result in changing the law. Therefore, they were responsible for paying Margot St. James's attorney fees. So it was still a win, even though she decriminalized, the laws changed. So strangely enough, no one really knew about this till about 2003. And there was a couple local spas that were raided, and they hired an attorney, Michael Kaliska, who explained to the judge that in 1998, the Rhode Island Supreme Court said that prostitution laws were created from stopping a woman from showing her wares in public. It had nothing to do with indoor work.
Right.
So when you think about it, from 1980 up until 2003, if you were arrested and you were indoors, your attorney didn't even provide you adequate legal defense. They didn't even research it. They just told you to plead guilty. Pay the fine. This is the way it was.
Without realizing it's illegal.
Yes.
It's not legal.
Right.
Anyway. Wow. Yeah, that's not fair at all.
Now, to move a little further, when it came to, so around 2003, everyone found out, wow, it's what they call the loophole.
Right.
You're decriminalized if you're indoors, and that is when the sex trafficking hysteria started, and it took them several years to actually pass the law, but by November 2009, all prostitution was criminalized in the state of Rhode Island.
Wow. Can you talk about that hysteria? What is
the trafficking hysteria is, the U.S. government is spending $2 billion a year funding NGOs under trafficking persons funding. So any NGO that applies for grants has some conditions. They can't support decriminalization of prostitution. They can't support harm reduction for sex workers, and they can't engage in network with sex workers. So it's like a gag order. And it's under the guise of creating awareness about trafficking as if people didn't know about it.
Right.
And they frame this as modern day slavery, which is kind of an insult to our history of slavery. And we know 80% of all labor abuses and actual real human trafficking take place outside the sex industry, but because sex is scandalous and you can tell great stories and write books and make movies, all the focus and money started to go about sex trafficking. And the real guys behind this, because it's a great campaign, no one wants to see children abused, right? But it was a great campaign to save the children when they knew that our estimates is out of the whole sex industry, maybe less than 2% were involved any minors.
Right.
But they started with these fake facts that the average age of entry into prostitution was 13 or 14. Yet when we looked at 30 years worth of prostitution arrests throughout the whole country, we could see 1.8% involved a minor, and the average age of arrest was 25 to 65. So we knew there was no way. So what they kind of did is cherry-picked a couple horrific cases of abuse and paraded it around in the media to make this look like it was the norm,
right,
to promote hysteria, stigma, and it's really a war on sex workers.
Definitely. It makes, sex work sound scarier than it is for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about COYOTE RI and what they're doing now?
Sure. We've done, so I relaunched COYOTE in 2010 as a response to them recriminalizing us, because after I had that taste of freedom, I was kind of really pissed off when they took it away. So some of the things we do is we do monthly street outreach. And we provide hygiene kits, tampons, clean needle exchange, fentanyl test strips, Narcan kits, condom distribution to anyone who needs it. So this includes sex workers, homeless people, poor people in general. We also do spa outreach once a month, where some of our outreach workers visit local spas with a resource list. We've translated our material into Chinese and Korean, and basically bring them a little gift basket. It's about starting to build trust where they'll tolerate their presence for 5 or 10 minutes once a month. And you also have to take into account a lot of these spas have been harassed by the anti-trafficking people, stigmatized, arrested, raided over again. None of these people want to help them. The only thing they want them to do is stop doing sex work. So some of the other things that we have done is a huge amount of research. And this started with my good friend Tara Burns up in Alaska. She surveyed about 30 sex workers for her thesis. We went on to survey 63 sex workers in Rhode Island, and then we went on to survey 1,500 sex workers across the United States.
Wow, that's so many. And were the results similar between?
Alaska and Rhode Island, the data was almost identical.
Wow.
We surveyed 63 Rhode Island sex workers, and 77% of them said they would not report violence due to fear of arrest, being threatened with arrest, outing their coworkers, or they didn't think the police would help them. 24% of them reported having been robbed, raped, or assaulted by the police. So the data was very similar, and then we kind of partnered with Desiree Alliance and SWAT Behind Bars, and we came up with 145 questions that we ended up asking 1,515 sex workers across the country. So we pretty much have more information and data on U.S. sex workers than anyone, and we're currently writing an ebook that we're hoping that will be published in 2020 that will have our research findings with policy recommendations.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. So after the break, we will talk more about FOSTA and what that is, the impact it's had, and Bella will teach us a little more on that and the research you've done regarding that as well.
Great, thanks.
Of course, looking forward to it. Hi, thanks for staying with us. Now we're going to talk about FOSTA. Bella, can you tell us what FOSTA is?
Yes, FOSTA stands for Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act of 2018, and the other bill in Congress was SESTA, Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act. And first I want you to take note of the word trafficking in itself and how that makes you think of borders and drugs and cartels and all kinds of scary, horrible things. And even the word enabling, it sounds like, you know, what we hear is like, stop enabling sex workers. Like, you want to stop sex workers, you want to displace them, but we're going to claim this as a victim thing. So to tell you a little bit about the history, Senator Harris.
Wait, is that the same Senator Harris running for president?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
She, when she won her 2016 Senate seat in California, just a week or two before the election, she had the CEOs of Backpage.com thrown in jail. Now, Backpage.com was the biggest advertising site for U.S. sex workers. It was kind of like the Walmart of escorts. And even though she knew that the charges weren't going to stick, so they were held without bond until they saw a judge, and the judge cut them loose, and the judge says, "Come on, Senator Harris, you know this was illegal." They're protected by Section 230, the Communications and Decency Act, which basically says you cannot hold a website accountable for third-party content. So if I post something on Facebook, you can't sue Facebook for it. Okay, they're not responsible. And I think 5 or 6 different states had tried to sue Backpage. They're claiming parents of teenagers who ended up running away, being exploited, wanted to hold Backpage accountable rather than any other circumstance accountable. Meanwhile, so it was really about them being able to sue for monetary damages. Now, meanwhile, Backpage had received numerous awards from the FBI for their cooperation. They were reporting up to 1 million ads a week of ads that they thought were underage. At one point, some of the NGOs working with the Fed said, "You're reporting too many people that aren't minors, slow down in your reporting." So, yeah, let's talk about some of the impacts. You want to talk about the impacts of FOSTA? So,
yeah, actually I have a question on that. How it impacts and targets sex workers' safety and livelihood.
Right. So one of the first things FOSTA did was not only it seized Backpage. You just typed in Backpage on your computer and it was gone, and it said seized by the FBI. So there isn't more Backpage. But other things it did is it utterly shuttered. What I mean by shuttered is websites shut their own website down because they feared the feds were going to come arrest them too.
Right.
A lot of sites started moving their servers out of the country, so they're not bound by US laws, and they couldn't be expected to cooperate with law enforcement like Backpage did. But with some of the really bad things is there was a lot of forums and places online that sex workers used to talk about, watch out for this guy Joe, this is his number, he's dangerous, he's done this to me, or how to vet good clients and give each other references and just share community. Most sex workers were building community online. It was a much safer way for them to build. It would be kind of like expecting an undocumented person to go to a rally and get up to the microphone and not worried about ice grabbing them, right?
Right.
So yeah, the impact was very bad to health and safety. We did do a survey project. Within 2 weeks of Backpage closing, we surveyed 262 U.S. workers to find out what the impact was for them. We found out that the most marginalized and poor sex workers were thrown out of hotels and their homes within days. They couldn't pay their rent. Screening went down 28%. So a lot of sex workers will screen clients to know who they are, where they work, or get a reference to something around safety.
Right.
All those things were gone. Sex workers were having to take on more riskier clients or clients they knew were less safe because the rent's still due. So they're going to take more and more risks. They're not just going to stop doing sex work and become homeless because a website's gone. So it was a really bad impact. Our community was in crisis coast to coast.
Definitely. And what are the ongoing updates of FOSTA and what's going on?
Well, right now, Woodhull has filed a constitutional challenge against FOSTA. And they're trying to prove, there's 3 plaintiffs. One of the plaintiffs is Alex Andrews, who runs a website called ratethatrescue.org. And her complaint is the DOJ is actually defending FOSTA, and they're saying, well, she's not at risk by providing harm reduction. And she's like, well, if we're telling people how to screen and how to use PayPal and different things, that can be considered promoting or abetting or helping. I mean, if you even words like harbor someone in prostitution.
Right.
So what does that mean? You gave them a ride, let them sleep on your couch. But the strongest case was a male massage guy in Oregon who could not advertise anymore because Craigslist shuttered, and even though his job was legal, he was now out of work.
And what do you mean by shuttered? They couldn't post anymore?
Well, no, Craigslist were scared. They said, well, basically, we don't know if anyone's going to do anything illegal in our dating section.
Right.
And because FOSTA is, threatening to throw everyone in jail, we're just going to take the whole section down because we can't control if someone posts something illegal or not, and we don't have the manpower to monitor every post.
Right. And are there global effects as well outside of the U.S. itself?
Yes. The feds also seized 22 affiliate sites that Backpage owned. So in Australia, they used a site called Cracker that Backpage owned. And in most of Australia, they're legalized or decriminalized, and these sex workers woke up one morning and their website was gone. There was no way to advertise, to make their phone ring, to make money, to pay their bills. So it was a devastating effect, but I was really proud of the fact that they really rallied together and sex workers formed their own new platform called Cracker, and they even made a version for the United States called Cracker.nz that is now owned and operated by sex workers. They asked for input for sex workers. What do you want us to change? It was a free site. They didn't charge people. Their servers are outside the U.S. domain, so they can't be held liable under FOSTA or U.S. laws.
That is awesome.
I could give you a little background about Backpage's case.
Yeah, please.
So one of the things that Senator Harris did is she formed a committee in Congress to get into the facts about Backpage, and she CEO'd or subpoenaed their CEOs. Now, in most cases, any good attorney will tell you when you're asked a question, plead the Fifth Amendment, which was basically saying, I'm not going to answer because I'm in fear it might incriminate myself. You can't make someone incriminate themselves and testify against themselves. So it doesn't mean that they're guilty of anything. It means they have good legal representation. So it was basically a bunch of senators and congressmen screaming answers at these two men saying things like, there was child sex trafficking going on in your website and da-da-da. And this went on for, hours and hours and hours. So if you're an observer of this, you might just kind of think that what all these politicians are saying is true, and these are just two horrible men. But if you kind of Google Village Voice Media, this was a publishing company that had been around since the 70s that had took on many government officials over the year and had made a lot of enemies in the government officials. So it was no different than the Yellow Pages that had escort ads in them for 50 years, and no one's claiming that the Yellow Pages are child sex traffickers.
Right.
So.
And with Backpage, did that make it easier to catch people who were criminals too? How do you catch them without a source like that?
That's a great point, because almost immediately the police said, we can't find any minors to rescue now that Backpage is gone. It was the best tool law enforcement had to fight trafficking. And if you think about it, before the internet, before 1991, sex workers either worked the streets for massage parlors or through agencies that ran the Yellow Page escort ads.
Right.
Basically, the internet got rid of the need to have a market facilitator or a pimp. It pretty much did away with most pimps and exploitation. But I want to bring it back to close with, the main factors that contribute to trafficking, exploitation, and violence against women are, one, poverty, criminalization, and bad immigration laws. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really good point.
So I'll tell you one more thing about the Backpage case. It's really, really unraveling. So the feds had seized, I think, 132 servers, and their forensic person was only allowed to see 5 of them, and they weren't even permitted to take pictures. And they basically don't have any of the information. They have 50 screenshots of Backpage ads. So this would be equivalent to me running around a murder scene without gloves or gear on and not, gathering the evidence.
Right.
They have no evidence to produce in court. It'd be like we missed all the DNA, so now you can't prove it's not your DNA because all the data information's gone. So we look forward to seeing what's going to happen. I think they go to trial March of 2020, and we really hope they win.
Definitely, yeah. It seems like they keep getting taken to court and keep getting.
And this is also about how the U.S. government censored free speech on the internet.
Right.
Under the guise of sex trafficking is an important reason enough to take away your First Amendment right. Because we don't even let haters do that when it comes to hating on migration or LGBT. You know, that gets shut. They still have the right to hate. It's right to free speech, but not anymore with FOSTA for sex workers.
Yeah, how did FOSTA change the relationship between sex work and other social justice movements?
I don't know if it changed it, but it made a lot of people aware, because a lot of people don't get into activism until they've been abused or they've been affected or they've been arrested,
right.
All right? When someone we know is shot by the police, we all rally around. When we see ICE invading our town and harassing our populations and, you know, deporting our community members, that's when, so I think it brought a lot of awareness. A lot more people are starting to get involved and pay attention. Here at Coyote, we work with a lot of local organizations because we understand how these things connect with, you know, the lack of affordable housing or lack of jobs that pay a living wage, lack of youth services to support our youth so they don't have to be involved in sex work.
Definitely. And how can people watching get involved with Coyote?
Well, they can always email info@coyoteri.org. They can visit our website at coyote.org or find us on Facebook or Twitter.
That's awesome. And yeah, it doesn't matter what you have to offer. You could always use help with
We always need volunteers, or if people need support, sex workers want to talk, we're here for them. Thank
you so much for talking to me. And thanks for watching The Good Neighbors. We'll be on every third Wednesday of
Sunday.
We'll premiere every third Sunday at 8:30 on Channel 13.
Thanks for having me. I look forward to more conversations in the future.
Thank you so much. Me too.